Hello, folks. How you doing? Uh, Thought I would talk about, let's say, bringing an understanding. Okay, about the mythology. What is it really saying to the human? And we will. I'll start off with this using, for example, Moses and the Kimite god Kephas. And we will also mention the Queen of Ethiopia. This is who Moses is said to have married. And how does this marriage take place, for example? Well, we say that the Queen of Ethiopia, okay, represents or is the constellation Cassiopeia. Okay. And Moses is involved with the constellation Cephas, called Kephas by the ancient Egyptians or the Kemites. So Moses marries the Queen of Ethiopia, saying that these two constellations appear in the sky around the same time. They're close together, in a sense. And so it's the same thing with Kephas. And Kephas is actually an aspect of the Kemite god Shu, from which Moses has been originally derived, even though Moses is in the Hebrew tradition. Okay, so now we see that in the sign of Scorpio, which seems to lie in the angle of the west, the sun enters Scorpio in the fall of the year. And at this time, the constellation of Cassiopeia sinks down. Okay. To or below the horizon. So she enters, according to the mythology, she enters the sign of Scorpio to do battle with the enemies of the sun, those who would strive to keep the sun back, to delay the sun, or to cause the sun to lose time, or to misdirect, for example, the sun, or the energy of the sun. But what is this sun god now that enters the underworld? Well, first, it is actually the sun goes down, okay, at the autumn equinox, and simply the days become shorter than the nights. The nights become longer than the days. But during these times, we say at night or during this time in the fall of the year, due to the sun's lessening in terms of daylight, it affects the human will. Now, I'm not talking about willpower. That's an uphill battle. It affects the human will, okay? And because of this, the human times loses vital hormones vital reproductive hormones, you see. And so this is how the human being is affected. So the mythology tells us that the Queen of Ethiopia, or the constellation Cassiopeia, sinks down to help the sun god in his struggle through the underworld. Well, this happens to be the human struggle through the underworld too, because as I said, the human willpower is to some degree weakened because of the lack of sunlight. In other words, sunlight strengthens and soothes and enforces the will of the human. That is a fact. So, in order to preserve this, okay, there are various exercises that the human can do in order to, let's say, to strengthen the will during this time of year or at night when the sun goes down. You see, there are certain times, and let's say in the wee hours of the morning, maybe 2, 3 o'clock, you know what I mean, when some reproductive fluids may come out, may seep out, or leave the body for sure. Well, what goes on relative to the constellation or Cassiopeia, okay, who represents the struggle against this loss? There are certain exercises that are to be done, okay, in order to prevent this loss of reproductive hormones during the night or during the fall of the year when the will is weaker, okay? Because during sunlight, during the day, this problem is minimal, very minimal. But at night, things change for the human being. So we see now that what the mythology is saying to us. The mythology is saying that what the human should do, could do, is prevent this waste of reproductive hormones. You see. But they use Scorpio and the Queen of Ethiopia or the constellation Cassiopeia, okay, as an example, as representative of what the human can do for himself, to preserve himself. So Moses, the one who marries Cassiopeia, or marries the Queen of Ethiopia, was the same as Cassiopeia, okay, is associated with the god Kephas, the Kimite god Kephas, and who is an aspect of Shu. Now, Shu is a god of breathing force. He's a breather. Hence, we get into now the idea of rhythmical breathing, regulated breathing, a deep breathing exercise, because this helps preserve the flow of reproductive hormones out of the body. It will stop it from leaving the body at a time when it would ordinarily leave the body. Okay? And so these breathing exercises work a wonder relative to this loss suffered by the human being. So now, other gods come to the rescue of the sun, such as the goddess Circe, who is the goddess of Scorpio. And in the mythology, they say how these goddesses fight, okay, the so-called monster. They refer to this idea of losing the semen as a monster that's causing this to happen. Okay, something like that. Okay, so they fight against this monster. They call it APAP. Okay, that's one of the names of the monster, APAP. And okay, so they fight against this monster, and then the sun, or the solar god, okay, reaches the winter solstice. Okay, and at the winter solstice, we know the days begin to become longer than the nights. They're not longer than the nights, they begin to become longer than the nights. And so this tells us that the battle during this time of year, the battle is beginning to be won. It goes in to the favor of the person who's working against losing his reproductive hormones. Okay, simply because the days are getting longer, but the battle still continues. And so what the human is really called upon to do in the mythology is to sublimate these reproductive hormones. Because these hormones, when they're not wasted out of the body by various means, can be used, okay, to strengthen the body and the brain. So this is very important to some folks during ancient times, no doubt. And these are all the priests in the temple and those who are going through initiation. These are those who refrained, okay, from having sexual relations or anything that would cause the loss of semen or reproductive hormones. Okay, so now they say here at the winter solstice, the god Shu and the god Anhur and even Joshua helped raise the sun up. They say they pulled the sun by ropes. That is, going from the winter solstice to the equinox, where the days become like even with the nights. And once the cross occurs, that is, when the so-called god or sun god crosses over, okay, over the celestial equator or the equator, okay, where the days become longer than the nights, then the will is strengthened. Okay, so we can equate the will with the solar god, you see, because here the will is strengthened, and it becomes much easier for the human to retain these reproductive hormones, you see. Okay, this is an idea of what the mythology is saying to us, and we have went to the astronomical aspect because we brought in the constellations, 3 of them. We mentioned the constellation of Cassiopeia. We mentioned the constellation Cephas. Okay, and we mentioned the constellation Scorpio, which all come into play in this aspect. Okay, and Cassiopeia, as mentioned, Cassiopeia goes down to help the sun god when the sun god enters the sign of Scorpio. Well, this says that what happens, the constellation moves, or appears to move. Okay? And so here's the notion, because it moves, it appears to move, like I said, it brings on the notion that, yes, this constellation at this time of year, here with what they call the angle of the west, the constellation, or the Queen of Ethiopia, or Cassiopeia, goes down to help the sun god. And when he's in dire straits, actually, in the middle of the night, or either at the autumn equinox, or in the sign of November, or the sign of Scorpio. Okay, just to give an idea of what the mythology is saying and how it says it, how it explains it, and there are many more examples that can be given, relative to the astronomical, mythological aspect of mythology. When we take into account the stars and the constellations and the planets. The planets are at play too. And so we'll get into more of this. Subscribe. There's much more that can be talked about, you see. And what I just mentioned, all of these things are in religious scriptures of our religions. Okay? The Hebrew text or the Judeo-Christian text, put them both together. And not any other text, even in the Hindu cults, etc. These things are of importance to the human being. And that's why they are in the ancient scriptures. But because the ancient scriptures are put in mythological terms, it's difficult to understand. So I try to explain some of this to folks so that they know what their religion is really saying to them and the ancient scriptures. But thank you folks very much for tuning in. And I have a lot more to say. And subscribe. I'm sure some of what I have to say, or hopefully all of it, will be interesting. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have a good one. Bye.